Right. Good afternoon again. Welcome to our February British Institute of Persian Studies webinar, which is a book launch, the launch of the IB Tauris Handbook of Iranian Cinema. I'm Andrew Newman, and I'm the British Institute of Persian Studies Outreach Director. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mariam Karimi for her to get the thing started. So Mariam, please, the floor, literally and figuratively, is yours.
Thank you very much for Andrew Newman and colleagues at BIPS to host us. I would like to kind of invite everybody that all my colleagues, we have a few of representatives of the wonderful contributors to our edited volume. I have my wonderful two kind of colleagues and collaborators, sisters, Michelle and Zahra with me as well. And I can say that we tried as a representative to have colleagues that are in similar time zones, but Michelle today is braving it at 4 a.m. Australian time to be with us. So that's amazing. Because we're on a very tight schedule and I'm trying to be kind of good, do my bit, give you a bit of an introduction about the volume, a little bit of an extract from the introduction we've collaboratively written, and to then pass on to my other colleagues to talk a little bit more about the collaborative nature of our work, and colleagues who've contributed to the volume about their articles. So without any further ado, I'm just going to share my own slides. So yes, here we go. This is quite emotional. It's been a long journey to get here with you, and I'm so pleased that we have this chance to virtually come together and celebrate this mammoth of a book. And hopefully there will be more of these, and we can have representations of other contributors who've graciously given their work and heart to make this book wonderful. So allow me to begin with a brief cinematic moment about a fragment that reverberates with the spirit of our volume. In Jafar Panahi's recent film that some of you might have seen, and those of you in the UK, you have access to see it it is actually available on iPlayer. In Jafar Panahi's recent film, No Bears, we are introduced to an exchange that is both deceptively simple and deeply resonant. A village man dismisses the warning of dangerous bears, only for Panahi's inquisitive character to question, what about the bear? This small dialogue, echoing the haunting specters of the past as is seen in Dariush Mehjui's seminal work, The Cow, serves as a metaphor for a myriad of fears, the silenced truths and the hidden narratives that have long been pervaded Iranian society and Iranian cinema have been working to represent. Iranian cinema, as our volume so passionately contends, is not a monolithic artifact, but rather a vibrant dialogue between history and modernity, a cinematic space where films emerge as both reflections and provocations of their times. From the early echoes of modernity and the fraught interplay between patriarchal traditions and state power, to contemporary challenges that saw voices rise in protest, Zan Zandagi Azadi, women life, freedom, Iranian films continue to bear witness to a nation in constant negotiation with itself. In films like No Bears, we witness the interplay between the artifice of the film within a film and the palpable reality of surveillance, censorship, and the battle of freedom for expression. Our handbook intentionally eschews the well-trodden paths of author-centric studies. Instead, we strived for an expansive interdisciplinary mapping of Iranian cinema, one that illuminates not only its iconic figures, but also the broader sociopolitical, cultural, and aesthetic processes that have sustained its evolution. Here, we consider production, circulation, and reception as vital conduits through which Iranian film navigates between the local and global, between tradition and innovation. We have sought to unravel how narrative tropes, from the claustrophobic chronotopes of exile to the luminous aspirations of transnational collaboration, have defined and redefined the cinema. This remapping is not confined by geographical and ideological borders. Our exploration acknowledges the vibrant diasporic networks and cinematic exiles who, by defying physical and metaphorical boundaries, have enriched the global film landscape, whether through clandestine journeys across borderlands or the intermingling of cultural narratives from Turkey, Egypt, and beyond. Iranian cinema emerges as a transnational dialogue, one where art persists in its quest to capture, subvert, and transform reality. A particularly resonant strand in our inquiry in the examination of is the examination of gender and the visionary contribution of women filmmakers. In a tradition marked by both remarkable resilience and poignant struggle, Iranian women directors have continuously reimagined cinematic language to challenge conventions and represent the intricacies of lived experience. From pioneering documentaries to narrative films that negotiate the taboos of motherhood and desire, these filmmakers have carved out spaces of resistance against an often oppressive sociopolitical order. Their work stands as both testament and provocation, a call to reassess the contours of representation and to recognize the feminine gaze as a potent force in the evolution of Iranian cinema. So bring this to conclude, this volume is not a mere compendium of what we already know. It is an invitation to reconfigure our understanding of Iranian cinema. It calls upon us to see cinema as a dynamic, heterogeneous dialogue, one that oscillates between fact and fiction, between state control and artistic freedom. As we trace the journey from a village where there are no bears to the broader border transcending narratives of exile and resistance, we are reminded that the stories crafted on celluloid and digital forms are far more than entertainment. They are cultural testimonies, ideological critique, and ultimately living records of nation's soul. So thank you for joining us today. I hope this little brief element can give you a bit of a taste, and then in the next few presentations, you'll get a bit more in-depth sight into some of the articles that my colleagues have put together, and it might invite you to then go and look into our book. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to my wonderful colleague, Michelle.
Hi, Mariam, and thank you everyone for attending our book launch. I have to apologize in advance if I don't appear to be completely comprehensible, because it is 4 a.m. here in Sydney, but I wouldn't have missed this for the world. Mariam, would you mind going to my slide? So I just thought Mariam's given you a really wonderful kind of introduction to our book and the philosophy that sits behind it. And I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an insight into our working process. So, you know, three editors. I can't remember how there were 20-something contributors. And one of the things that really stood out for me throughout the whole process was the idea of collaborative pleasure. Every meeting that we had at all odd times of the day and night, because we're in 3 time zones at one point, was always such a pleasure. Mariam introduced us as sisters, and I think we have kind of developed that really strong bond. I wanted to, I mean, here in Australia, at universities, often kind of book editing isn't really considered to be part of, you know, research, like true research. But I have to actually say that working with the editors and working with our colleagues who contributed, it really did feel like we were in a true research community. And I think that's the benefit of volumes like this, is that it can bring together people from across the world. It can allow those ideas to intersect across a range of different, you know, films, different topics, different themes. But the beauty of the volume, as we were kind of, I feel like we were sort of unfolding chapter after chapter, the beauty of the volume was that there were so many through lines, there were so many connections, but also so many fresh and different voices. And if you wouldn't mind going to my next slide, Mariam. So in a way, I want to kind of put forward a little bit of an argument here for all of us who really have enjoyed in the past this kind of editing process. I really think that editing of books and the contributions that people make to books really should be seen and understood as a genuinely collaborative form of research. It really is, because as we were going through, we were editing work, we were in discussion with our authors, and there were moments where we helped to shape some of the works that made it into the volume, and how those works actually shaped our understanding of what we do. I think it's really important to see this as a process and not just an output. So the processual elements of the research, yes, they gave rise to this amazing physical text, but the process was so important. In a world where many of us are not able to get to many conferences, I think this kind of work can also foster collegial exchange and networking. It can help to establish connections for many of us to perhaps go on to work on future projects. And the other important thing is that we were dedicated to supporting some ECRs who contributed to the volume to make sure that the voices that were being heard and seen and will be read across the volume went across the whole spectrum of the academic career. And indeed, some of our collaborators are not even academics. We had some wonderful film critics contribute as well. And in that kind of light, given that we supported a number of ECRs, it worked as I think, a bit of a mentoring opportunity for them. And I think kind of finally, my last thought is to say that editing, particularly a large volume like this, it really is a form of curatorship. And we took our responsibilities as curators of this moment in Iranian film studies history as a kind of we took it very seriously, and we felt that we were that we wanted to kind of nurture fresh visions and fresh ideas to come out into the world, so that we can continue this discussion around the amazing Iranian cinema. So that's all I've got. I'll let you pass on to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And our next speaker is my other wonderful colleague, Zahra.
Thanks so much, Mariam June.
I'll stop
hi,
sharing.
folks. Okay. Yeah, I don't have any slides to share, and I'll be very brief. I'm kind of in the midst of losing my voice. This is more of a gratitude post for me. Thanks to BIPS for giving us a space to celebrate the book. Thank you to my wonderful co-editors. As an early career scholar, I started this project with Mariam and Michelle when I was during my postdoc, during COVID in Toronto. And then they've modeled for me what wonderful academia looks like, the possibilities and potentialities of academia that can be collaborative, ethical, compassionate, at the same time rigorous, and dare I say fun. It's been a really fun journey putting this book together. It's a massive book, it's 23 chapters, and for that I really want to, in this space, thank all of our contributors for trusting us with their wonderful works, for being patient with us as timelines shifted and changed. So yeah, it's been one heck of a journey. One theme that really stands out to me throughout the book, that comes through in the introduction, as well as the entirety of the book that you'll see, that we hope you'll read, is the theme of transnational cinema and transnational theory and concepts that really make us think about Iranian cinema in different and newer ways, that make us challenge the boundaries and borders of nationhood, which I think is extremely timely and important. It's a good call to think about the fragility of those boundaries. And we think of that in various ways through film history, genre, gender, and so forth. So transnational theory, it really does inform the way we're thinking about Iranian cinema, but it's also really informed the way we've put this book together. This has been an extremely collaborative and international and transnational effort. We've worked with scholars from all over the world, and some of the people just right here speaking today kind of testify to that. And just a quick note on my own contribution to the book, aside from the editing and the intro. So my chapter is in the section called Visionary Women Filmmakers. And what an honor to be in that section, to have the privilege to work on the cinematic contributions of the women of Iran, and to be in such great company with incredible scholars, friends, and colleagues. And I'm going to name them: Najmeh, Tanya, and Mariam, who also have continuously, tirelessly contributed to this, to what I think is still understudied and underappreciated cinema of the women of Iran. And I hope that this can start even more scholarship on Iranian women's cinema. And I think I'll stop here and pass the mic, the screen, all of it back to Mariam to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you so much. So without, in favor of time, I'm just very quickly going to pass to wonderful Professor Ladan Nushin, who will start speaking to us about their contribution. I'm going to share your slides.
Thanks, Mariam John. So first, I'd like to thank the organisers for the invitation to speak on this panel. I'm really delighted to be here, also on behalf of my co-author, Kamyar Salavati, who's not able to be here today. So I'm going to talk, I'm the first, I think, of several speakers who are going to be introducing briefly their chapters. I'm going to talk about our chapter, which is on the sounds of Tehran City Symphony films. You've got the title there on the screen. And it's probably worth noting up front that despite the well-established scholarship on Iranian cinema, until recently, there was surprisingly little work on music and sound in Iranian films. I mean, of course, that's starting to change now. So the so-called city symphony was a genre that emerged in the 1920s, drawing on elements from avant-garde, experimental, and newly emerging documentary film, as well as from wider artistic movements of the time, born out of rapid urbanization and industrialization in the period after World War I and the ensuing social changes. City symphonies are non-fiction films without a strong narrative, in which the city itself becomes the central protagonist rather than merely a backdrop. So these films are often poetic and reflexive in style, and typically, but not always, follow a sort of dawn to dusk structure. So the early films were silent, and later ones usually set to newly composed or existing music. And from early on, the genre became infused with musical metaphor, most obviously the use of the descriptor symphony, but also the idea of film editing itself as a kind of rhythmic composition. So the majority of city symphony films from the 1920s and 30s were of European and North American cities. So Berlin, Paris, and New York were particular favorites. But the idea was also taken up by filmmakers globally. So our chapter introduces the genre and explores a number of films about Tehran in the city symphony style, with a focus on music and sound more broadly, particularly as structuring devices. And the films we discuss in the chapter are listed there on the slide. So Khosrow Parvizi's Tehran 51 from 1972, was the first film, as far as we're aware, that was made in Iran that could be described as a city symphony, after which there was quite a long gap until the 2010s, when there was a renewed interest in the genre. So we've got the film Burial by Puyam Moradi, that's 2015, Tehran Closed City, a Shahr Khamush by Hoshem Shakeri, 2020, and Tehran City Symphony, Symphony Shahr by Kiana Ahmadi and Aydin Karimi. So just to briefly run through these, Tehran 51, Khosrow Parvizi's film, is a sharp critique of modernization in Iran in the early 70s and offers a somewhat bleak and dystopian view of Tehran. Parvizi largely uses sound to represent how industrialization has come to control human beings and enforce regimes of labor and centralized power. So there's a fast-paced diegetic soundtrack, which includes the sounds of factories, traffic, whistles, sirens, police radios, medical equipment, typewriters, communication towers, loudspeakers, and so on. By contrast, Tehran Closed City, Tehran Shahr Khamush, made in the spring of 2020 as a chronicle of everyday life during the COVID-19 pandemic, has a severely reduced sound palette, completely devoid of the relentless and dehumanizing mechanized noise so prominent in Tehran 51. Indeed, made almost 50 years apart, it would be hard to find two more contrasting portrayals of Tehran. And sound is central to this. The muted palette of Tehran Closed City, however, is an uneasy and unnatural one, born of enforced segregation, of uncertainty and fear as people navigate the city in their personal bubbles. We see closed shops, empty highways. Actually, we can have the next slide, Mariam John, thank you. I've got a couple of screenshots from the film. We see closed shops, empty highways, quite unusual, obviously, for Iran, for Tehran, shuttered market stalls, silent queues of people, and abandoned building sites. And there's a particularly interesting passage. You can see the building site, which has obviously stopped working due to the pandemic, and there's a young man playing guitar on a rooftop within the same frame. So if we could go back to slide 1. Just briefly, the other two films discussed in the chapter focus on Tehran's car-based lifestyle. So Burial is a dawn-to-dusk cameo of the everyday life of motor vehicles in which the cars have their own agency and almost seem to be driving themselves. We see very few people except in the service of cars. The film is set to a single soundtrack that offers a kind of romanticized portrayal of a city in which the car is king. And then finally, Tehran City Symphony also focuses on the social life of the motor car, but from a more human perspective, and with a particular focus on how young people have appropriated the car as an in-between public-private space of sociality. So in all 4 films, then, sound plays a central role in characterizing the city. And I think my 5 minutes are up, so I'll just stop there. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the editors for the opportunity to contribute to this wonderful volume. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ladanjan. Wonderful. So, and I'm going to just pass the mic to our next speaker, Kaveh Abbasian. I believe if you have slides that you would like to share, you have them yourself.
Thank you, Mariam John. No, I don't have slides. So kind of you're stuck with me. So thank you so much to the organizers and of the book launch today, as well as thank you so much to the editors of the book. I witnessed how hard you worked on this, and also how long it took to actually get the book out, to the level that today, before coming to the book launch, I had to read the book to remember what I actually wrote. So my chapter is The War Must Go. So I don't have slides, but I can do this. The War Must Go On, the 3 phases of Iranian sacred defense cinema. Iranian sacred defense cinema, or Iranian war cinema, is in the section regarding genre filmmaking in Iran. It's Iranian war movies, Iranian war cinemas, which started during the 1980s during the war between Iran and Iraq. I decided to divide the 3 phases of Iranian sacred defense cinema into the first phase, which is the revolutionary upheaval and the idealism of the era. I called it the apocalyptic idealism, with all the not necessarily just Iranian Shia ideology of apocalypticism, but just generally revolutionary idealism as well, and revolutionary apocalypticism. And also after the war, I have devised, in the first phase, I focused on filmmakers such as Ibrahim Hatemikia, Murteza Avini, and Rasul Mullah Walipour. And here I decided to focus on Avini as well, even though he was not a cinematic filmmaker, but he was a television filmmaker. But he is, in my opinion, the most important sacred defense filmmaker, because He trained many of the other filmmakers, as well as he is the only Iranian filmmaker who even wrote about film theory and film and cinema more than he made films in a way, which in a way is a reminder of, I don't want to compare to say that they're the same level, but it's a reminder of the filmmakers who came to be during the Soviet montage and after the Soviet Revolution in 1917. The second phase, I have devised it as post-apocalyptic melancholia. Here I took a little bit of a unorthodox experimental approach in regard to in the discussion of Iranian cinema, because I brought in a little bit of psychoanalysis in order to talk about this. I started with Freud and Walter Benjamin all the way to Wendy Brown to speak about the melancholia that is a result of the failure of ideals. So in a way, I define it as this melancholia, I define it as the longing for an ideal for which the material condition no longer exists. And this is something that we can see in the films, in some of these films that are associated with Iranian sacred defense cinema, which are made mostly after the war or in the months leading to the end of the war, in which you can see this sense of melancholia for which the filmmaker is often perhaps even not aware of. All the way to, so in all of these, we see this Islamic ideology to a large extent, Islamic symbolism and metaphor and all the rest of it, not much nationalism, even though these are nationalistic projects, but you don't see nationalism so obviously and brazen in them. They are covered in metaphors of Shia ideology, Islamic ideology. But the last phase, which I've called extravagant jingoism for like violent nationalism, aggressive nationalism, belongs to the recent years, mostly after the 2009 Green Movement. I mean, if we are to set a milestone year. And that is mostly associated with the direct involvement of the Revolutionary Guards, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, in filmmaking via establishing of the organizations such as the OJ Cultural Institute, and also by via a kind of emergence of super nationalistic sentiments, not just among the population, which is propagated by the state, but also in the filmmaking movement. So the films are no longer only about Karbala and Hussein and Abul Fazl and these metaphors, but here now we have strong presence of, for example, the Iranian flag, the focus on land, the focus on nationalism and that kind of heritage. So these are the three phases that I kind of decided to divide the Iranian sacred defense cinema or war movies in order to be able to understand it better. And then for each phase, we have several different filmmakers. The only filmmaker who is present in all of these phases is the great shapeshifter of Iranian cinema, Ibrahim Hatami Kia, whose films are quite interesting, and he continues to make films today. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kavajan. And next, we're moving to the presentation from Max Blitzin, which I believe since we started collaborating, you've now changed time zones and you're much closer to us. So will you share your own screen? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have that there. Thanks so much, Mariam. So Iranian horror has become more and more of a topic of popular and scholarly interest in recent years, but this is mainly because of films of the Iranian diaspora, and two films in particular that I have in the top row here, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night and Under the Shadow. And Girl Walks Home Alone was hailed in its press release as the first Iranian vampire Western. And the point of my chapter basically is to show that there's kind of a broader history there than that quotation lets on. And if we turn to pre-revolutionary cinema, particularly the commercial films of film Farsi, we have the 1967 movie Vampire Woman, And if you're familiar at all with film Farsi, you won't be surprised that it has musical numbers, so it's not very scary. But it does work against the idea that A Girl Walks Home Alone was the first time that we ever saw a Persian-speaking vampire on film. For the sake of time now in this short presentation, I'm going to move us way forward now into the 21st century. And two filmmakers working in Iran I'd like to highlight, Shahram Mokri and Mani Haqiqi. And for Mokri, particularly his films Invasion and Fish and Cat. The first thing about these films that I want to note is they both consist of a single unbroken take. And this is just a remarkable formal achievement, first of all, but it's a formal achievement that is used for very particular ends. And Mokri cites the influence of the Tazieh Passion Play, and this is a long-standing tradition in Iranian cinema, particularly in the work of Bahram Beyzaie. Another local filmmaker I highlight in the chapter is Mani Haqiqi, and particularly his films A Dragon Arrives and Pig. And a key trait that I'd like to highlight in his work is self-reflexivity. And like the influence of the Tazieh, this is a long-standing tradition in Iranian cinema, perhaps best known in filmmakers like Abbas Kiarostami and Mohsen Makhmalbaf and Jafar Panahandeh, but really appears widely beyond that. And it's no surprise that Haqiqi would be rooted in this tradition, given that he's the grandson of the filmmaker Ibrahim Golestan, so he's got very deep roots in Iranian cinema. And so these filmmakers demonstrate the significance of horror made in Iran in recent years. But of course, the films made in the diaspora are much better known. And I do turn to those in the second part of the chapter. And there has been quite a bit of writing on two of these films. A lot of it has come from scholars who usually don't work on Iranian cinema, with the important exception of Sarha. And so I really encourage all of you to read her article in addition to my chapter. And I really try to build on that work here and show how these films have more roots in Persian culture than usually gets talked about. The vampire of, the vampire of A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is veiled in a chador, and as a result, this film was widely criticized by the government because they didn't like the idea of a woman wearing a chador going around biting people and killing pimps. Under the Shadow, this is a film about a mother and son during the war with Iraq. And I connect this film with the sacred defense films that Kaveh was just speaking about. And I focus particularly on films about mother figures, most notably Bashu the Little Stranger and Gilane. The last film on here is probably the least well known, but I think it's maybe by the most prominent name. It was Marjane Satrapi, of course, best known for her comic book memoir Persepolis. She also has this serial killer horror comedy, but it's not what usually gets talked about with her work. And so through Iranian horror, made both inside and outside the country, we get the opportunity to see something new about filmmakers of Iran and the diaspora. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're moving to our next speaker, my wonderful colleague, Lindsay Moore. And I will share your slides in 2 seconds.
Thank you, Mariam. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. So thank you, as the slides are coming up, first to Bits for hosting us, to Michelle, Mariam, and Zara for including me in this marvelous book. I mean, it really is a thing of beauty and substance. Thanks also to my fellow speakers today, really interesting presentations so far, and also to the audience for your time and interest. Thanks, Mariam. So my chapter, which is called Shirin Neshat and Larissa Sansur, Transnational Stars, Trans-Regional Constellation. The chapter sits in the transnational exchanges section of the handbook and is, to my knowledge, the first comparative analysis of these two diaspora artist filmmakers, Shirin Neshat, a US-based Iranian, and British-based Palestinian, Larissa Sansour. If we can have the next slide, please, Mariam. To explain my title, I reconstellate first to flag the star status of these women on the contemporary transnational art circuit. I'm also echoing Hamid Dabashi, quoting Walter Benjamin, on, quote, the fictive and fruitful borderlines of trauma's memory and history. This is a helpful way to approach work that addresses the histories of Iran and Palestine, respectively, in a realist and metaphorical way. So kind of approaches history at a slant, as it were, via these different kind of genre techniques. The images on the slide here, first from Neshat's Women Without Men of 2009, and on the other side, on the right-hand side, from Sansour's In Vitro, a 30-minute film from 2019. In each case, the film is co-directed with a male life partner who is rarely mentioned in the critical coverage of these women's work. If we can have the next slide, please, Mariam. Neshat and Sansour have followed similar artistic trajectories, first producing work that fuses image and text, and then short allegorical films, and most recently, not longer narrative cinema, which is partly a reflection of the, the kind of, I guess, the attention they've received, and hence the kind of greater funding that they have to complete their projects. They've each accrued considerable capital in Europe and North America. They both make frequent use of crisp monochromatic imagery and sculptural form. The images that you have here are stills from two of Neshat's short films from the late 90s. The top one is called Rapture and the bottom one is called Further. In both cases, and also in Sansour's work, multi-channel filming embeds connection and division, mobility and stasis dialectically, asking the viewer to straddle different positions and so implicitly flagging the issue of transcultural translation. Can we have the next one, please, Mariam? There's an example from Sansour's work, In Vitro, again, showing the use of this kind of split screen to kind of place the viewer between perspectives. The branding of these artists reflects international visual arts trends. Their female signatures are expected to authenticate culture and qualify Orientalism. Their aesthetic reconciles high art and popular genre. They both capitalize on polyglot fluency and aesthetic hybridity. And the work is critically linkable to very distinguished national cinema traditions. Can we have the next one, please, Mariam? Thank you. In the chapter, I also explore shared eco-poetical and feminist orientations, particularly in these two films, In Vitro by Sansour and Women Without Men by Neshat. The latter is an adaptation of Shahram Paspour's novella of the same name from 1989, originally in Farsi. The two films are rooted in national trauma, the overthrowing of Mossadegh in 1953 in Iran, the 1948 Nakba or catastrophe in Palestine, but both reach towards planetary and even post-human concerns and possibilities. Neshat and Sansour show that capitalist modernity creates global traumatic effects due to what Jennifer Wenzel calls slick alliances between capitalism and colonialism. The image on the slide here is a still from In Vitro, when a viscous black fluid rushes through Bethlehem, catches fire and explodes, causing a mass exodus from the city, with obvious kind of allegorical import. As Wenzel says, quote, one cannot tell the story of globalization without acknowledging the environment and the formerly colonized world, which produces the raw material, notably oil, is indispensable rather than marginal to this history. And the last slide, thanks, Mariam. Neshat and Sansor also speculate on what curator and critic Nat Muller calls planetary co-futures and co-ontologies. In Neshat's case, using literary and mythic adaptation, and in Sansor's case, a retro-futurist sci-fi imaginary. In Women Without Men, women retreat from patriarchy to a walled garden, although Neshat also actively foregrounds the political background of Passepour's original story. Sansor places her two female protagonists in a laboratory below Bethlehem, where they cultivate heirloom crops towards a return, but they also bitterly debate the burden of heritage. The younger woman in this film is actually a clone. These films both imagine feminocentric heterotopias, kind of spaces outside normal spaces or places that provide transient alternatives to real-world locations and histories. So I hope to show in the chapter that despite some important differences in their work, especially tonally, these filmmakers share distinctive thematic, conceptual, and formal tendencies. And while I don't think they're representative of national cinematic tendencies, they can critically be aligned with Iranian cinema on the one hand, Palestinian cinema on the other. I hope to have whetted your appetite about the possibility of comparative analysis between Iranian and other cinemas that might reach across the Swana region in both contesting hegemonic histories and also reimagining shared or planetary futures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. And we come to last but not least, Matthias Whitman's presentation.
Well, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I will share my slides right now. I hope it works.
Yes, it is.
Can you see my slides? Perfect.
Yes.
First of all, let me say it's my pleasure to be involved in this launch of a great book with wonderful readings. Congrats to you, Mariam, Michelle, and Sahra. It makes me very happy to have contributed a chapter. Well, let me offer you a couple of glimpses on my book chapter, a chapter in which I have tried to develop a kind of tropological atlas, a cartography of the variety of looks, gazes, and glimpses that in Iranian cinema are directed at the camera right now. Be it before or after 1979. Thus, the focus of my chapter is also on carryovers across the revolutionary divide, or let's say a transformation, and considers examples across the history of Iranian cinema, from Akos Boshi's Actuality about the Shah visiting Belgium around 1900 over films by Ali Khatami, Abbas Kiarostami, Sohrab Shahid Saleh and Bahram Beyzaie, up to Mohsen Makhmalbaf and Rakhshan Banetemad. Needless to say, looks at the camera and the illusion of breaking through the fourth wall is not just a trope in Iranian cinema, but in my chapter I assume that hardly any other cinema culture has developed such a refined landscape of gaze structures, mirror constructions, and complex image-spectator relations, challenging the well-established concepts and frameworks of Western film theory with a variety of accentuations and additional aspects of meaning, especially when we bring into play the socio-cultural frameworks of the gaze, the refined forms of audience implications, the history of love poetry and miniature painting, the Shia passion play called Tauris, or the commandments of looking after the Islamic Revolution, and of course the tactics of resistance to it. I have selected few examples that I would like to comment on briefly. Let me remind you of the arrow-like toxic glances thrown by Tuba via mirror at the protagonist played by Behruz Vosori in Torgi from 1971, the underrated Luti movie by Ali Khatami, echoing the tropes of mystical love poetry, ghazal writers and miniature painters Khatami, the Saadi of Iranian cinema, dramatizes the love struck as the victim of the gaze from an object of beauty. And this object of beauty is also the movie itself that subjects and slaves the viewer by means of tactile film techniques. Let me remind you of the mirror shots, interface moments, and extreme forms of frontal staging, which became signature shots of Abbas Kiarostami. In the report "And the Wind Will Carry Us," we see glances that do not address us, the audience, at all, but are directed at an imaginary mirror surface, blocking at the same time our view into the image space, as if the protagonists knew that they are being watched, using intrusive proximity as a kind of protective shield against observers and spies. In Shirin, Kiarostami picks up the signature shots again, putting us not in the place of a mirror surface, but the cinema screen itself, showing us faces and reactions of 109 actresses, while not showing us what they see on the screen. When it comes to Iranian cinema's complex dialogue with the Tazieh, its forms of audience implications, and a very feminist reappropriation of this only Shiite form of drama, Bahram Beyzaie's advanced use of looks at the camera, of course, cannot be left out. He's certainly not missing in my chapter, but in view of the very short time, let me just raise your curiosity with those screenshots, and let me give Rakhshan Banetemad's wonderful character of Tuba the last word or the last look at the camera. A gaze that concludes Banetemad's Under the Skin of the City, accompanied by a statement that I would like to consider a manifesto of subaltern emancipation that adds another layer to the look at the camera. The yearning of Tuba towards the camera and her statement, "After all, who the hell are you going to show these films to?" is the longing of a black Chadori worker from the south of Tehran for real participation, the claim to be heard and listened to as a subaltern voice with a legitimate say. And by echoing some crucial demands we can find in the manifestos of Third Cinema, Cinema Verité, and Sinemaye Azad, Banetemad herself articulates through Tuba's voice her own longing for not losing contact with the people and for remaining responsive and responsible. With Tuba's unforgettable, demanding, highly contemporary look, I say thank you for your attention and hope to have made you a little curious about my chapter and the entire book. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we overestimated. Everyone was amazing for keeping time, but we're very close to the 6 o'clock. So I think at this stage, I would need Andrew Newman's advice.
Yes, terrific. Congratulations. Well done, everyone. And the technology all worked. And so, yeah, well, very well done to everybody. Terrific job. I have, we have a couple of minutes for questions. I have one myself. And then I'll get to the ones here in case we get a couple more. I wonder the extent to which post-79 film generally has engaged with non-Persian speakers, non-urban based Persian speakers in particular. There's been some discussion recently about the extent to which Persian is the national language, a debate that's also heard in the United States. And I wonder, tribal films about tribal groups or anything like that, not in the sense of anthropological kinds of films, but wherein the backdrop or the background is set in those kinds of scenes.
Which one of my colleagues would like to take this? Maybe Michelle?
Oh, thank you. I would actually say in response to that, you know, if we think about post-79 filmmaking, a lot of the films that made it into festivals and things in the early period after the revolution, they were the ones that tended to, I guess, kind of show, you know, kind of rural areas. And more recently, I think we've had a much more considered kind of, in the last sort of maybe 20 years, 15, 20 years, Iranian cinema has really landed in the cities. And we don't see so much of that rural, tribal sort of stuff. But early on, I think, going out into the rural landscape, with films like Gabe, for example, films like Where is the Friend's House, Abbas Kiarostami, in a way, those were kind of like the least problematic kinds of settings for films, because they weren't rooted in the cities where there could have potentially been sort of difficulties in representing male-female relations, for example. And if you take your films out into the further regions, there was always something a little less political about doing that. And you could sort of set your films in times that were not necessarily even particularly, rooted in the present moment. So it was a way of filmmakers getting a bit of distance. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right, I do have one question. I invite people to use the Q&A, questions and answers, to have other questions. I have a question directed to Mr. Abbasian. I have a question about Iranian defense cinema and how these films may distort historical facts. For example, The Walnut Tree, a 2020 Iranian biographical war drama directed by Mohsen Mahdavian and written by Ibrahim Amini and Hossein Hassani, focuses on the chemical bombing at Sardasht. Additionally, Che, 2014 Iranian biographical war film directed by Ibrahim Hatami Kia, presents an unrealistic portrayal of the Kurds. Have you addressed these kinds of issues in your research? It seems that films with such historical distortions cannot provide honest narratives of this historical period.
Thank you very much. This question is actually related to your previous question as well, because these are depictions of non-Persian speaking people, and which unfortunately for a very long time has been happening by the hand of filmmakers from the center, mostly Tehran, like even Kiarostami going to the north, Makhmalbaf going to, for Gabe, going among the tribal communities. These are mostly Persian-speaking Tehrani filmmakers with an Orientalist gaze, with sometimes, if you like, a colonial gaze, making films about these other peoples who are object of exoticism, or sometimes, in the case of Hatami Kia, for example, making films in Baluchistan, or actually trying to represent Baluchi people. They're all criminals, terrorists, smugglers, or that kind of thing. But the point is that in recent years, especially with the rise of local film festivals, we have local native filmmakers making films about their own people, culture, representation in their own languages as well. Like in for example, Kurdish cinema is very strong in Iran, for example. As in relation to the question about Ibrahim Hatamikia's Che, Mahdavian's The Walnut Tree, these are other examples of the Tehrani filmmakers. In this case, propaganda filmmakers, state propaganda, war propaganda filmmakers going to Kurdistan to making films about the plight of the Kurdish people. And my chapter is not specifically about this angle towards war cinema, but I do talk about both of these filmmakers and both of these films, especially about Hatami Kia, because I mentioned he has been making films for a very long time. He's been present in all these three phases of Iranian cinema. Che is a very good example, actually, of how this shift takes place, this nationalistic jingoism, this extravagant jingoism, because it represents one of the early films that is taking place in this period, in this last phase. It's not talking about Islamic ideology anymore. It's mostly about nationalism. Iran, you see the flag of Iran as against these Kurdish apparently separatists who are all of them apparently terrorists as well. So yeah, these are good examples that you mentioned. I do briefly talk about them, but although not from the angle of non-Persian speakers, which was in regard to your previous questions. But obviously bad representation, these are propaganda movies, and you're right about that. You cannot rely on them as historically factual.
There was a contribution here referencing a Kurdish filmmaker called Bahram Beyzaie, who makes his films in Kurdish and often filmed in Kurdistan. So we have time for a couple more questions if folks would like to contribute. I was interested in the rural urban because, of course, one of the markers of contemporary Iranian society is that in the early 1980s, the balance of population shifted and became both more urban based as well as younger and better educated and this kind of thing. But the shift becomes more urban. So it seems that this is coming in that way as well. Yeah, people chip in, please. Turn on your microphone and chip in if people want to make a comment. Yeah. Right. Well, I don't have any other questions, but I want to thank Mariam and all the contributors, both to this evening's gathering or this morning's gathering for Michelle, who now think of this. You have the rest of your day to go
Tomorrow morning. I'm a day ahead.
Yeah, it was absolutely terrific, and it ran flawlessly. So congratulations to everybody. And I think this is a very interesting platform. Our webinars haven't done this kind of thing before, and it worked marvelously. So if anybody ever proposes it again to do this kind of a launch of an edited volume, I'm going to say, oh yeah, well that worked perfectly with the Handbook of Iranian Cinema. So I want to thank everybody and wish everybody across the world a good morning or a good afternoon or a good evening. And thank all the participants as well for both the volume, but also for coming on this morning or this afternoon or this evening to talk about their work and the importance of this. Hold on, I have one more. Oh, yeah, the person who asked the first question says thank you very much. So, right. So thank you all. Thank you to the contributors. Thank you to BIP staff, Sylvia and Brendan. And may I wish everybody a fond farewell for now. Do keep up with the BIPS webinars, get on our mailing list and such, because we do try and do these on a monthly basis. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentations. Love you all.